Good morning. My name is Dr. Gerics. I'm a humanware partner with the Cleveland Metropolitan School Districts. I service networks 1 and 3. And today I'm coming to you to talk a little bit about healing-centered engagement. We've been embarking on trauma-informed care and practices throughout the district now for a better part of 3 years, 4 years. And healing-centered engagement aligns really well with what we've been doing with trauma-informed care. I'm going to make mention of that, talk about that throughout the presentation. But before we start, just want to kind of draw your attention to this cartoon. And this reminds me so much of how education is today. You can see you got your caveman, you got the bear, and I'm going to read it to you, even though you can probably see it on the screen. But it says, sure, it's far-fetched, but we've stayed this long, so we might as well see how it turns out, right? It's a common theme sometimes in education that we stick with things just based out of routine rather than innovation. And sometimes the results, as you can probably predict from this bear, are not always that good. So when we're looking at healing-centered engagement, I just want you to read this statement and look at this and just kind of think to yourself, or if you're near somebody, what does this mean? I am more than what happened to me. You can think of it for the lens of the students that you teach through your own personal experiences, but I am more than what happened to me. I kind of want you to just think of that answer as we move on the presentation and what that means. And maybe for you, that meaning evolves as we roll through healing-centered engagement. So what we really look to seek in healing-centered engagement is that we're moving from what happened to you to what's right with you. And as we go through and kind of show you the differences, I know I said that healing-centered engagement and trauma-informed practices align really well, but there are some key differences. If trauma-informed care promotes itself to looking at a lens of just simply reducing symptoms within a child. And what I mean by that is trauma-informed care seeks to reduce anxiety, seeks to reduce anger, distrust, things of that nature, things that we can see on the outside. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's well-being and that there's healing in process. It just means that we're reducing the symptoms. And just for future reference, when I refer to well-being, what I'm really talking about is hope, happiness, imagination, aspiration, trust. All these things that we really, really aspire to have. And as you can see these words on the screen, hope, happiness, imagination, aspiration, right? These seem simple words, but actually sometimes can be complex to achieve. So here's the formal definition of healing-centered engagement. It views individuals exposed to trauma as agents in the creation of their own well-being rather than victims of the traumatic events that they suffered. So going back to that statement, I am more than what happened to me, we can see how healing-centered engagement really addresses this and lends itself to thinking more and probing deeper into how do we achieve this. So going back to the definition, if we're to create students who are active participants in their own well-being, right, rather than victims of trauma, there are certain things that have to happen. And healing-centered engagement, and we'll go through this, but is really built upon 3 pillars of theory. And really it is empathy, self-reflection, and hope. I want you to take a look at this quote. Again, I'm going to ask you to kind of think to yourself, what does this quote mean? And I'm going to read it to you. If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. Now, everywhere I've done this presentation, participants have come up with different meanings for what this is and how this resounds with them. So you may be thinking it has something different, a different meaning to you. If I was looking at this and reflecting on it, it would probably resonate differently with me. And that's okay. But when we're looking at this, oftentimes I sum up with a story. I was part of a trip to Haiti in which we were distributing shoes and clothes and different items to people of Haiti. And I'll never forget, he was roughly, I would say, maybe 15 or 16. And I handed him a pair of shoes, and he looked at me, and he handed them back. And in broken English, he said, "I don't want these." And I looked at him and I thought, and I was actually kind of offended. I know that's strange to say, but I was offended because here I am giving you shoes, right? And through different translations and things like that, what came out, I'm summing it up for you, was he didn't want the shoes because he viewed this as temporary. And what he said is, "I want what you have." And it wasn't materialistic things. It wasn't the shoes. It wasn't the clothes. It wasn't anything that we were handing out. But what it came down to is he saw that I was what they call an educated person. And that's what he wanted. He saw that as his ticket tied out. So in looking at this quote, that's what resonates with me every time I look at this quote. If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time, right? So here I am handing out goods that I think they need. But what he was really going for was not materialistic things, right? But that he saw that when I had that education, that we were bound by education, and he wanted to work together with that. And so every time I look at this quote, that's what resonates with me. Now, if you've never had that experience, that's obviously not what's going to resonate with you, and that's okay. So moving along and you'll see Healing Center Engagement now kind of shortened with acronym HCE, so just kind of pointing it out to you that that's what I'm talking about. When you see HCE, it means Healing Center Engagement. So as you go down these bullet points, again, I'm not going to read these to you. You can see them on the screen for yourself. But I want you to go through these bullet points and look at these. And again, while we were talking about this, I want you to pay attention and be self-aware of what is resonating, what is impacting you, because that's going to be very productive down the road when we talk about the 3 pillars. So looking at these points, right, you can see that trauma, well-being, they are all relational to where we work, educate, play, right? So it is where our presence is, and it correlates with that. So basically what we're talking about is based on experience. And so as we go through this, and Healing Center Engagement, as we roll through this process, the awareness of what's going on even today in society, inequality, injustice, right? How does this contribute to not just only an individual's well-being, but a community's well-being? When we're looking at Healing Center Engagement, what we really want to be cognizant of is that we are raising up from deficit-based supports to asset-driven strategies. And you say, hey, Joe, what does that mean? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because in just a simple comparison between deficit-based supports and asset-driven strategies, we can see that there's huge differences. Look at the deficit-based supports side. Just even that first point, view students from lens of harm. Now, if we're not careful with our trauma-informed practice, this is exactly how we'll see our students. Not that we want to harm them. Obviously, that's not what I'm talking about. But when I mention harm, what I'm talking about are the hard places and the hard experiences that many of our students come from. Extreme poverty, maybe sometimes there's situations of abuse. And when we're looking at our student from the lens of harm, what that leads to are lower expectations, and somehow that our students are coming to us with a deficiency. So switch over, you can see the first bullet point on the asset-driven strategy side. So we're acknowledging the trauma, right? This has happened to you. We understand that. But we're going to build upon those experiences, and sometimes those experiences are very uncomfortable to think about, to talk about, but what we're taking out of that are the knowledge, the skills, the curiosity, right? And we're going to enhance that because what we know out of trauma, and what you probably have heard many times out of our trauma-informed care professional learning series, is that children who come from traumatic places, traumatic experiences, are extremely resilient. You know, I oftentimes reference my own 3 children who came out, were adopted out of foster care, and just the extreme resiliency that I've seen them grow in. And so if we look at our children from a lens of harm, we'll never focus on the resiliency. And therefore, again, like I mentioned before, that leads to lower expectations. Well, they can't achieve this because ... They'll never be able to attain this because ... Right? We are staying in the realm of what happened to that child. But as you know from that opening statement, there's so much more than what has happened to that child, right? And I do want to highlight that the last point of that deficit-based support. If we're only simply looking to reduce the symptoms of trauma, if we're only simply looking to, listen, I don't fault you for this, but seeking to streamline the classroom to make it function better for me as the educator, we're not really being active participants in a student's well-being. And I didn't mention this up front, but I can already hear this rattling around in your brain. Joe, I'm not a counselor. And I fully am aware of that. You may not be a licensed counselor. However, in the mind of a child, what I found both in the classroom and being an administrator, they don't care your specific degree, your pedigree, what you have, or if you're a licensed counselor. If they are a person that you can trust, they're going to open up to you, right? And so I'm not talking about deep therapeutic cognitive strategies, right? These are just things that we can do as part of being a good educator, right? And again, the last part of this asset-driven strategy is that we focus on what we want to achieve. And when I say we, I'm talking about as a partnership between myself as an educator and that child and my students. So it begets the question, where do I start with this? This is all great. Yes, I want to be an active part in my students' happiness and their well-being. That's great, Joe, but how do we make this happen? And again, I do want to state that what we're talking about today, this is a Healing Center Engagement 101, right? This isn't the end-all be-all to what this is. There are many deeper levels to this. And so what I'm hoping to accomplish through this is kind of whetting your appetite for how do I get this done in my classroom? And whether that classroom is brick and mortar or virtual. So I mentioned earlier that there are 3 pillars associated with Healing Center engagement. And the first pillar is creating a culture of empathy. Now, if I ask you, what is empathy, what would you come up with the definition of? Right, so probably, walk a mile in my shoes, understanding one's experiences. But I want to kind of highlight with empathy, and I'm saying this because I've heard this state before, I can't possibly relate to what my students have gone through. And that's true. You're talking about occurring experiences that you can't relate to with your child. However, I want to bring you back to, do you know what it means to feel loss? Do you know what it means to feel joy? Have you ever felt scared, anxious, afraid, right? Have you ever felt comfortable, at peace? So even though certain experiences we may not be able to relate to with our students, we can build our empathetic capacity through simply being able to connect emotionally, right? And when we're talking about creating a culture of empathy, what we're really talking about is raising children who are going to be emotionally literate. That's huge to increase empathetic capacity. We need emotional literate people, right? And we need children, we need adults for that matter, who are able to actively listen and listen to understand, right? And so as we look at this, and what I'm referring to is this empathy exchange. Empathy exchange is essentially listening to understand and reading emotions. And if we're able to listen to understand where a person is coming from, no matter what their experience is, and if we're able to identify emotions, and we're able to become increasingly emotionally literate, we are already becoming more empathetic to what's going on. So as we look at emotional literacy, what does this mean? It simply means being able to identify, understand emotions. That's what emotional literacy is. And let me give you an example of why it's important to be emotionally literate. Most people are able to identify 4 basic emotions, and those are happy, scared, angry, and surprised. Now, if I just take angry, for example, and kind of break this down, is there a difference between being angry and feeling guilty? Is there a difference between being angry and feeling shameful? Yes, there is. And oftentimes, even I caught myself when I was in the classroom and even as administrator doing this, when a child would come upset to me, I would say, "Oh, why are you so angry?" Right? And a child who's unable to articulate specific emotions like, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling annoyed, I'm feeling irritated, I'm feeling shameful, I'm feeling guilty, I'm feeling even malicious, right? If they are not able to delineate different degrees of anger, they're simply labeling that child as the angry child, and you know what I mean, without forming any strategies to help them be able to specify the different degree to that. And so if we're able to articulate more complex emotions, then we're able to then have better discussions around not only what I'm feeling, but I'm better able to pinpoint and identify what's going on in you as well. And as you can see there, it fosters safety. If I'm able to articulate this to you, that's going to make me feel comfortable, and then I'm able to feel safe. There's a lot of power in being able to name the emotions. And you've probably heard the phrase before, if you can name it, you can tame it, right? We don't fault children for their uncomfortable or comfortable feelings, right? Because we say all feelings are okay. And that's true in building empathetic capacity. You're going to feel what you're going to feel. It's actions that then are either, for lack of a better term, correct or incorrect, or productive or non-productive. I do want to highlight this last point for you. You're not going to create a culture of empathy overnight, right? Mainly because in creating a culture of empathy, there has to be a culture of trust that is present. And you know as well as I do how hard it is to cultivate a culture of trust. Just think of your circle of friends. You have your inner circle, you have your outer circle, you have those people you say you're friends, you have those, 565 friends on Facebook who are friends, right? So there's different degrees of friends, but only a few that we would trust. So we're talking about classroom, even in a virtual setting. How am I going to create a culture of trust in this setting? So the first pillar is empathy. The second pillar is building critical reflection. And I want you to ask yourself, why is it important to have critically reflective students? And I know you can probably pull an answer from your education classes as to why we should hone in on focusing and building skills in our students to be critically reflective. But I want an answer from you. I want you to think about, what does it really mean to be critically reflective, and why is that important? When we're talking about healing-centered engagement, what we have to do is we have to analyze policies and procedures that we have institutionally, and by institutionally I mean in the school as a whole, but also me as a person, as an educator. Are my policies, are my procedures promoting harm or healing? And this is a tough question. This is a tough question because if we look at just even certain exclusionary practices that occur daily in our buildings, are they promoting harm or healing? Well, any exclusionary practice is going to promote harm, right? Because we're breaking community. And automatically, when you probably heard of exclusionary practice, you thought, oh, he's talking about suspension, right? But I'm talking about we sometimes operate with exclusionary practices within our classroom. So if we want to build critically reflective students, we first have to be honest and critically reflective with ourselves. What am I doing to promote inclusion practices in the classroom and virtually, right? Simple relationship tactics or strategies will help to build this culture of trust that can work for building both the empathetic capacity and helping our scholars, our students, become critically reflective. You can see that third bullet point there, adult mindset. The adult mindset is because I told you to do this, because that's the way things are. Students, and I've noticed this even from my time in the classroom, are increasingly asking the question, why? And the why question can be really annoying if we're honest with ourselves, especially if we don't have their answers, or especially if it's a really tough answer. And if we're talking about, here's an example. well, you're going to have to, go to our calming corner. You have to go to the timeout corner. You're going to have to leave the classroom for a minute. Well, why? Right? And then that puts us in a position to then be the enforcer of a rule, right? You did this because it's happened, right? Here's a just quick aside. I work for HumanWare, right? So we're all about social emotional learning. I've heard it stated many times, directly and indirectly, that social emotional learning is nothing but that fluff and stuff. Come give a kid a hug. This, make them feel good about themselves. And I just want to highlight for you that that's really can't be further from the truth, because at the heart of social emotional learning is predictability, routine, and responsibility, right? It's even one of the core competencies of social emotional learning, responsible decision making. So when we're looking at being able to answer this question, why, it is about holding children accountable for actions that are non-productive or harmful, right? It's about routine and predictability. If you do this, this is going to happen, right? But there has to be buy-in for the child, and so this is where critical reflection comes into play. So when we're answering the question why for a student, what you really want them to focus on is, well, what were you feeling emotionally during this time, right? It's also bringing those restorative questions into play in conjunction with healing center engagement. What were you feeling during this time? What could you do differently? Or what would you want to do differently? So even in asking leading questions, and you can do this virtually too, through the virtual classroom, we're helping children become critically reflective based on their own actions. Remember, healing center engagement is all contingent on being able to partner with children in their well-being process, not just me telling them what they need to do to go down the path of well-being, right? Because we can lead a horse to water, right? But we can't make it a drink. And our executive director, Bill Stencil, always says, but I can chase it around the pond long enough to make it thirsty. And that's what we're really trying to do. You're not going to get success with this right off the bat. And I think as a former educator and reflecting on my own practice in the classroom, right, that was always really frustrating. I'm trying this, I want immediate results. And nothing in education is immediate. And that's something that you have to be cognizant of, whether you're building that empathetic capacity, creating that culture of empathy, whether you're trying to build critical reflection, and also if you're trying to build hope in children, right? If I were to ask you what hope means, just as I would with empathy, you're probably going to come up with many different definitions of what hope is, right? And that's great. But whatever that definition of hope is to you, what we know about children who are ingrained in complex trauma is that they can't see past their now. I want you to think about, has there ever been a time where you were experiencing a difficult situation and you couldn't see past what was going on in that moment, right? You had that trench view. You couldn't see past, when it seemed like everything was crumbling around you. And I want you to take that experience in for many of our children, that is their day-to-day. Why should I hope in something better when this is my now? You can see that first bullet point. Daily survival and ongoing crisis management makes it difficult to see beyond the present. I can't imagine a better future for myself. And sometimes, I've heard children not directly articulate this, but, working in high schools, some of my students would say, again, not explicitly, but in a roundabout way, I don't really deserve anything better than this. And that's a really sad place to be when you are in a place where you don't think you deserve better than what you are experiencing now. And when we talk about trauma, that is the number one greatest casualty of that traumatic experience, is that hopes, dreams, desires, wants, anything that's not aligned with immediate gratification or survival needs is squashed. And so to create hope, it's something we actually have to foster within our students. We have to be able to go back and create activities that are explicitly honing in on that there is something better, right? That there is opportunity for you, that there is a life outside of the now for you. And being able to help our students reimagine something different, helps us go back to that, what Healing Center engagement is. It's what we want to achieve together, right? We are partnering with our children, with our students in what we want to achieve, right? We're partnering with them in reimagining and designing a life that they want for themselves. And there are a lot of activities that can align with hope, right? And we don't have time to get into all that today. But again, the whole presentation was, like I said, Healing Center Engagement 101. So it's When Your Appetite. And I want to say that we can definitely come in and do deeper dives into how to make this more applicable into your classroom, into your planning center, into your building. And as we close out here, those are my questions for you. How are you going to take critical reflection, empathy, hope, and make it take it from words on the screen to applicable strategies within the classroom? You know, in working with education and doing what I do now as being a HumanWare partner for, it's like 7 years now, the expertise lies within you. You're the experts in your field, right? And in taking these 3 pillars, what can I explicitly do within my education situation and make these come to life? And as we close out, that's really what I want you to ponder and think about and take away. How am I going to make this happen for my students? So I want to thank you for your time. I hope you found this valuable. And I look forward to working with you and partnering with you to help lift Healing Center engagement up off the ground for you, for your classroom, and for your building. Thank you.